Hi everyone and welcome to the Retro channel, and today we are checking out another RF replacement for the Commodore 64 and 128. These are the result of many hours of work over the last few months, and that's also kind of why I haven't released as many videos lately, but that should all change now because these things are finally done. And in this video, we'll finally get to see these in action. Of course, I have released previous RF modulator replacements, which did a pretty good job, but these are a different beast entirely. Basically, I went back to the drawing board, threw away everything I knew from those, and started all over again. And apart from the things along the edge, the top side is now completely free of components, so of course I had to put something there in that space, so what better than 10 print. But on the underside we have a bunch of SMD components which are all neatly tucked away. So not only do we get a much cleaner look, these are also slightly cheaper to produce, which means they're cheaper to purchase. As you can see, there are currently 4 different versions. There's one for the Commodore 128D and the 128 flat, one for the Commodore 128 DCR, which is the metal case version, one for the 64 Shortboard, and one for the 64 Longboard. And the reason there are different versions is because obviously the dimensions are slightly different, as are the output port placements, but also the circuits that I've designed vary between these boards. So I've done a lot of fine tuning to get the best possible video output quality from each of these various revisions. There will also be a 5th version, which will also be for the Commodore 64 Longboard, but instead of the S-video connector, there'll be a micro HDMI connector, and that is for the VIC-2 Kawari, the large version that has the HDMI output, basically so you can take HDMI from the Kawari and have that HDMI output easily accessible so you can plug a cable straight in, rather than trying to run a cable from the VIC-2 Kawari itself. Unfortunately, as the Kawari is pretty much only guaranteed to work with Longboard Commodore 64s, I don't plan on releasing a Shortboard version with a HDMI output, and as the Kawari only outputs a video signal, basically a DVI signal over a HDMI connector, you will still need to handle audio separately, so you could always use the 3.5mm output jack for that, but that part is a little bit more complicated, and I'm not going to be covering that kind of setup in this video. What we will look at, however, is how to install each of these in their respective systems, and of course get some before and after screenshots. But before we do all that, let's go over the basic features that all of these have in common. So from the top side, all these boards are pretty similar. Some of the features carried over from the previous version are the direct S-video output, and then we have a 3.5mm audio output. This is a stereo jack, and it can be switched between an external input, which you'd wire up to these pin headers for Luma code or dual SIDs. You can also have just dual mono, so both left and right channel would be the regular SID audio, or you can have left channel as the SID audio and the right channel as composite video in case you want a direct composite video connection from here. Personally, I much prefer using S-video, but the composite video out of these things has also been greatly improved, so we'll see the results of that soon enough. There is also the contrast fine-tune adjustment, and this is there because all VIC-2s seem to output a slightly different lumen to sync voltage ratio, and you can use an oscilloscope to do this kind of adjustment and actually measure the output voltages, but you don't necessarily need that. Pretty much changing the foreground color to white on the Commodore 64 and then changing the text to yellow and typing in a few characters should be enough to show you if you need to make any adjustments. Basically, if the white doesn't look pure white, then you might want to play with this a little bit. And likewise, if the white looks really white and the yellow text is also blending into that white, you may want to fiddle around with this trim pot. It can also help mask some jail bars, but in general, the design of these things actually does a really good job at reducing jail bars just on its own. No Luma fix required. All of the video signals from the RF replacement are still passed through to the DIN connector, so even if you prefer to use this, you'll still get the upgraded video from this thing. The only thing that you lose out on really is an RF output, but I don't think too many people are concerned with that these days. The only major difference, I guess, is that the chroma is attenuated to 300 millivolts. Originally, Commodore used 1 volt peak to peak for their chroma signal, but the S-Video standard is actually 300 millivolts. So this is attenuated both from the S-Video output on the board here and from the DIN jack. So if you're using something like Sven Petersen's AV breakout adapter, you want to make sure that you put a little jumper on that chroma high setting, just so it doesn't further attenuate the chroma. But 300 millivolts is perfect for, obviously, S-Video devices, but it also works just fine with original Commodore monitors, so don't worry too much about that. You can still use the regular Luma chroma connection, even though this board attenuates the chroma down to 300 millivolts. So let's start out by installing the Longboard version, and there are chapters on this video, so if you want to jump ahead to a particular install process, feel free to do so. Let me grab a bread bin. Alright, here's a bread bin that obviously has the original RF modulator still installed, so we'll be able to get some good before and after shots. Obviously these things are designed to replace any RF modulator on a Longboard, except for the original 326-298 boards, the first revision Commodore 64 boards, and it's easy to tell if you've got one of them because the AV DIN connector will only be a 5-pin rather than an 8-pin. The RF modulator on the original boards really is there just to create an RF signal, whereas on the later boards, it also handles the video amplification and filtering for all the other signals like composite and S-Video that you would find on the 8-pin DIN connector. So let's open this thing up and see what we've got on the inside, because I have no idea what board revision is in this machine. I'm not even sure if it actually works, so I guess we're about to find that out too. Alright, we have a 250407, so this should have a pretty rubbish video output. These boards are notorious for looking terrible, so this is going to be a very nice upgrade for this machine. Question is, does it work? And I see a bunch of MOS logic, so I'm not holding my breath. Might have to do a quick repair.
Approximately 10 hours later.
Ta-da! Yes, this machine was very broken as expected, but now it actually works again. So that's all going to have to be the subject of a different video, which I've now already filmed. So stay tuned for that, I guess. But you may notice some slight changes from the last shot of this board. And yes, the VIC-2 was dead. That's pretty obvious. But I've done my best to hide some of the other changes, just so we don't give away too many spoilers. You'll have to wait for the other video to come out to see what was actually wrong with this thing. But it was very, very broken, hence why I'm wearing a different shirt, because it is the next day. So this did take a few hours to repair, but it is now up and running, and we can finally stick in this new RF replacement. But before we do that, let's get some screenshots of what it currently looks like with the original RF modulator. So of course we've got our basic screen, and this is just composite video, but this doesn't really tell us much because it's quite blue and there's not many details on it. So let's throw in something different, and this is what I've been playing around with for the last few hours while I fix this machine. The DesTest Max. Yeah, because it does use a fairly fine font, it's easier to see some of the deficiencies, especially with composite video. So text isn't all that sharp, and we do get a bit of color bleed around the edges. It's also good that it's got black text on a white background, because then it's, you know, a high contrast image, and it's easier to spot some of these faults. Much easier than the regular blue basic screen. However, the thing that I most like to use for this is simply the Easy Flash 3 menu, because this has sort of graphics and text. Especially with composite, the text is quite blurry, and there's not many fine details in there, although there is some sort of over-enhanced edges. There's also some jail bars showing up in there, so we'll see what the RF replacement can do with that. Let's do the same test with S-Video, and then we'll get this old RF modulator out and stick the new one in. So I won't focus on this for too long, but there it is with S-Video, so text is a little bit sharper, although there's still quite a bit of blur there. Definitely I can make out the jail bars, and well, those edges look a lot smoother, more well-defined without being sort of jagged. Just quickly grab a sample from the DesTest Max. Yeah, text is definitely a lot clearer, but there's still definitely a shadow to the right of the text. And again, on the regular basic screen, there's not that much to see apart from some jail bars. So let's get this thing out and throw in our RF replacement. So this is pretty much going to be the same for all machines. Obviously you need to take the actual board out. For the longboards, there's a few tabs that we just need to straighten, so may as well get that done before we go desoldering anything. That one's already straight. And then there's 4 points around the outside of the RF modulator. Well, that one doesn't even have any solder on it, but normally it does. So we need to desolder those and then desolder these 4 connections over here and the 4 over here. Definitely a desoldering gun is going to make this job a lot easier, but if you don't have one of these, then you might just have to go with wick or a manual desoldering pump, or even hot air might help. But yeah, if possible, use a desoldering gun. And the tip on my desoldering gun doesn't quite fit over these metal posts, so probably have to braid some of that off. Definitely made light work of those signal connections though. Yeah, this stuff is going to need some braid. Alright, that might do it. The main thing you want to make sure of is that all these signal connections are desoldered properly, otherwise you'll end up lifting the little pads on this thing. As for the mounting posts, it shouldn't really matter if there's a little bit of solder still holding it on. That'll pretty much break off when we try and lift the RF modulator off, and there's no real damage that you can do by you know, pulling too hard on one of those. It looks like all of them are loose except for this one connection over here. I reckon just a bit of a twist with the pliers should break that free. There it goes. Alright, and that's the hard part done. So this is very easy to install. You just pretty much drop it in and then solder away. But before you do that, I do recommend just throwing it back in the case just to make sure all the ports line up with the case properly. And that looks good to me. Just prop that up with a screwdriver. Whoops. And you just want to make sure that all the pins are actually coming through the board, so you can see them over here, all our signal connections, and these couple down here. We can now add solder to the rest. These ones don't really have to be perfect, as long as you get a bit of solder on them, just for a bit of structural integrity. You can see my solder is going all gross and weird. But yeah, these posts aren't so important. And there's no post up the front here, so don't even worry about that. The main thing we want to get right is the signal connections, so just make sure that you get a decent amount of solder on them and they're not bridged to anything else. Cool, we're done. There we go. Certainly a lot better looking than this old junk. Let's see how it performs. I guess we'll start off with S-Video. In fact, we'll use the regular DIN connector. It doesn't really matter if you use the S-Video jack or the DIN connector on here. They're both going to give you the same upgraded video quality. So we'll stick with this for now. And this is S-Video with our regular basic prompt. What we should do first is adjust this contrast fine tune. So let me plug in a keyboard. And I'll change the foreground color to white. Ooh, this keyboard is terrible. Comma. Right. And if it'll let me, I'll change the background color, or the border color, to light gray. And then we'll change the cursor color to yellow. And just print a few things on the screen. So yeah, the white foreground definitely doesn't look white, so let's adjust this little trim pot. Just turn it one way, Yep, and things are getting wider, so if we go back the other way, yeah, you can see everything looks pretty grey, very grey. So we definitely want to go up this way for this particular VIC-2. And pretty much want to go until white looks white. There's a bit of noise in there. So something around there. If you keep going, then you'll actually see that the white starts to overtake the yellow characters. And the pound symbol is a good one because it uses a few single pixels, so it's easier to see if you've gone too far. Something around there looks pretty good. Now the reason I changed the border to light grey is so we can try and hide some of those jowl bars. That looks about right. Let's throw in the Easy Flash 3 cartridge and see how that looks. And keep in mind we're looking at S-Video at the moment, but we'll check out Composite in a second. Looks pretty damn good. Text is nice and sharp. Our whites are white. There is still a hint of some jail bars, but we might be able to deal with that as well. And yeah, I don't see any obvious checkerboarding, which is also nice. Let's throw in Des Test Max, and then we'll do the same with Composite. There we go. There's some well-defined characters. Right, let's switch over to Composite and see how that looks. So here's our Des Test Max, and yeah, although it's obviously not as sharp as S-Video because it's not really possible, it's definitely a huge improvement over the original RF modulator. Same goes for the Easy Flash 3. Text is not as sharp as compared to S-Video, but at the same time, yeah, the background, those purple shapes aren't quite as jagged, which is kind of nice. It's a little bit softer. And of course, for our basic prompt, it looks like that. Definitely still some jail bars in there, but like I said, we may be able to do something with that as well. Now, as I mentioned, we can use this 3.5mm output to get audio or composite video even. So if I plug composite into the right channel and audio into the left, of course you could split this audio again if you wanted dual mono, but then you're going to have a bunch of adapters hanging out everywhere. Change that to composite. It should look pretty much the same as before. And there you go. So basically the same as using the original DIN connector. So either way, we still get the upgraded video output. Personally, for my default setup, I usually use S-Video because it just looks better. So I'll usually have that plugged in there and have this set to dual mono. And there it is. As I said, it's the same S-Video that you get from the DIN connector now. Now, as for those jail bars, you may be able to further reduce these, although they're pretty hard to spot at the moment. This isn't really something that's specific to my RF modulator. Basically what we can do is bypass the Luma signal from running across the main board from the VIC-2 to the RF modulator, replacing that with a bit of shielded wire, which should stop any interference getting into the Luma signal and creating our jail bars on its way from the VIC-2 to the RF modulator. All right, let's see how that now looks over S-Video. Oh yeah, pretty good. I might be able to still just faintly see some jail bars in there, but hey, even I can't work miracles. It's definitely a huge improvement over where we started. I think the Easy Flash 3 is the best way to spot any jail bars, or at least bring them out. And yeah, I can barely see them. In fact, can I even see them? Let's check it out with the composite. Okay, so there we go. That's our composite video. I'm sure basic will look pretty basic. And the Des Test Max, yeah, the screen's mostly white, so can't really spot jail bars with a white screen most of the time. Cool, and that is the RF replacement for the Longboard done. Let's move on to the Shortboard version. Right, here's our C64C shortboard that we're going to be working on, and of course it has the original RF modulator installed. This was actually sent over as a repair job and a video upgrade job because apparently this machine does have some pretty bad gel bars. So, well, let's just check that out, see what it looks like. I think the power switch on this is a bit dodgy, but apart from that, I'm pretty sure this machine works just fine. Right, we'll start off with composite, and yeah, that looks pretty composite-y. Definitely not as bad as the original Longboard, but yeah, definitely some gel bars in there. Let's see what it looks like with the Easy Flash 3. Yeah, that switch is very mushy. Well, yeah, with the Easy Flash 3 it looks absolutely terrible, so the contrast is definitely blown out. And yeah, everything looks very, very harsh. And with DesTest, the text looks pretty good, well, apart from the green text, which is blending into the white background. So yeah, still got that contrast issue, and definitely some gel bars in the borders. And that's only over composite. Let's see what it looks like over S-Video. Oh, it looks a lot better. Definitely gel bars and checkerboarding in the borders. With the Easy Flash 3, yep, it's way too bright, and yep, definitely some gel bars in there. And with good old basic, oh yeah, you can really see the gel bars. Looks pretty sharp though, I'll give it that. Alright, let's open this thing up. I'll probably quickly sort out that power switch, that should be quite easy, and then we'll swap out the RF modulator. Alright, yeah, this power switch is very mushy. I'm going to desolder this and pull it apart because I want to give it a proper clean out first. And it didn't immediately fall apart, but yeah, those contacts aren't looking so great. They should drop out if we're lucky. One's being stubborn. There we go. Alright, that should do it. A clean of our contacts, and now we can throw all this back together. Quick switch repair. Yeah, that feels so much better, and I'm sure it's going to work a lot better. Let's get this RF modulator out. So we've got 4 tabs around the outside that we need to straighten, and these have all been soldered, which is extra annoying. It's nothing the desoldering gun won't make short work of. Of course, if you don't have a desoldering gun, then you're going to have to be relying on braid or a manual pump. And then our 4 signal connections. And the other 4. Alright, that should do it. Just straighten these up. And give this a little wiggle. Make sure all the little pins wiggle with it. I think one of them is stuck. There we go. Cool, that's out. And with the hardest part done, all we need to do now is throw our replacement in. Should drop straight in, just make sure everything's come through the holes properly, so all our little posts should be sticking through, and it's always worth just double checking that the ports actually line up with the 64 case. Yeah, that should be fine. Let's solder this in place. It's not always easy to fill in these side holes, but as long as you've got solder on the post and the board, it doesn't really matter if there's a gap. Oh, there we go. Managed to fill that one in. Come back and clean up this one. And this one. That'll do. The most important part is all these signal connections. And we are done. Right, and with the machine mostly reassembled, let's take this thing for a spin. Let's set our contrast level to be somewhat correct. So we'll change the foreground to white and the border color to light gray, and then we'll change cursor color to yellow and print a few pound symbols. And it pretty much already looks around spot on. So if we just adjust this a little bit, so that way makes white look more like gray. And of course, if we go the other way, white's going to get very white. And if you go too far, it's just going to start to wash out the actual little yellow text. So yeah, that's way too high. Well, in this case, the middle position seems to be about right. That looks pretty good to me. Let's check it out with the Easy Flash 3. Keep in mind this is S video. There it is. Looking pretty damn good. I can't spot any obvious issues, at least not from where I'm sitting. The Des Test Max, yeah, that looks good as expected. Much better. And of course we can use the direct outputs from the RF replacement as well. So plug S video straight into there, it does the same thing. We can even set the 3.5mm jack to output composite video, so flick the switch to CVBS, or composite. What does CVBS stand for? I don't remember. Oh, we're still looking at S video. Composite video definitely doesn't look that good. It's going to look good, but not that good. There we go. That's how composite's looking. Pretty damn good, I'd say. And that's how it looks with the Easy Flash 3. Now for the shortboards, I don't recommend trying to bypass the Luma signal on the main board as I showed with the longboards using this shielded wire, because the shortboards, they actually did a little bit of planning, and the chroma signal that runs across these boards is actually protected by a couple of guard traces. So it kind of keeps down interference getting into that chroma signal on the main board, and bypassing that trace does pretty much nothing. I mean, you might get the tiniest improvement, but I don't really think it's worth cutting up your main board for. So I don't recommend the Luma bypass mod for the shortboards. It really doesn't do that much at all. For the 128s on the other hand, that's a whole nother story. So let's get on to one of them. All right, the last one, the big one, the 128D, and this has version 2 of my RF replacement. So let's get some before shots, first of all with S video. Right, so this is S video with version 2 of my RF replacement, which is pretty damn good on a 128. Obviously we've got some gel bars in there, but yeah, not too bad. The RFOFF should do better than that, but yeah, version 2 was actually quite good. Yeah, the Easy Flash also looks pretty good. Again, we've got some gel bars in there, but that's kind of to be expected. And the Des Test Max also looks pretty good. There's still some gel bars, maybe a little bit of checkerboarding, but not too shabby. Checking out composite, oh yeah, there's definitely a lot of color bleed around those text areas, and that is one of the downsides of version 2, I think. Pretty damn good S video output, but not so great on the composite side, unfortunately. Yeah, and again, composite definitely shows some color bleeding or color fringing. I tried to go pretty sharp with composite on version 2 of the RF replacement, and that's sort of the downside of trying to do that is, yeah, you get that sort of fringing effect. But all in all, not too bad. Now to tear this thing apart so we can get the RF modulator out, and it's quite a big job on the 128D, so give me a few minutes. So let's get version 2 out and put the new RFOFF in. I think that's got it. The pads on this thing are quickly disappearing because this thing has seen quite a few RF replacements already in its time. So yeah, not the kind of thing you want to change over every day. And I just lost a couple more. What can you do? Of course, if you have the original RF modulator in there, removing it is pretty much the same deal, and hopefully you won't damage any of the pads on the first removal. And we should be able to just drop the new one straight in, just like so. And we'll just check it against the case just to make sure everything lines up properly. Okay, I just realized that I'm trying to install the DCR version in the plastic case D. That will definitely not work. You don't want to try and do that. They are a different size, so the DCR version is a little bit longer and definitely won't fit. Oh dear. Right. That's better. I'd say we're good. Now we're going to get this back out so we can solder it in. Now, in terms of these, I can see that trace is good and the pad is good. This one is barely hanging on. That should be okay. This one still seems fine, although I don't think it's even connected to anything. This one, ooh, also just barely hanging on, I think. It should be okay. These ones all look fine, which is good. All right, I think everything's connected. Yeah, like I said, if you go changing these too often, you'll eventually start to lift pads and traces. That goes there. No, there. That goes nowhere. I think that goes to ground. Yeah. That goes there. That's good. This goes here. That goes there. That goes there. And that goes there. Yep, okay. Our connections are still there, so that's good. There we go. It is in. Let's throw this back in the case. I won't fully reassemble the machine because we may end up doing the Luma bypass if the jail bars are still terrible. Right, that should be good enough. We're not worried about the disk drive. Just need to be able to power the main board and obviously power the entire system. And we want to be slightly careful now that we have mains power connected. Let's just start off with S-Video, I guess. All right. So there's our S-Video. I can still just faintly see some jail bars, but they're certainly even further reduced from version 2. So that's pretty nice. Contrast looks about right. I don't have a keyboard connected, so I can't do my regular contrast test by changing the screen to white and the cursor color to gray, or the cursor color to yellow. But at least we can use the easy flash to sort of adjust it. So if I turn this down, you'll see those white parts aren't quite as white anymore. And if we turn it all the way up the other way, the little yellow dots in the white areas completely disappear. So we want to find the spot where white looks white and we can still see those little yellow dots in between. Something like that is looking pretty good, I think. Des Test Max will also look pretty good, I imagine. Yeah, that looks good. Nice and sharp. Let's see how that looks over composite, because yeah, version 2 unfortunately didn't do a great job with composite. I think version 3 is going to do a lot better, and we may as well use the 3.5mm jack, although we could also still use the DIN connector and get the same benefits from that, but let's go for the 3.5mm, change that to composite or CVBS, and change the retro tink as well. There we go. So yeah, definitely a lot less color fringing. It's still some there, but it is composite video after all, so it's never going to be perfect. Still better than version 2 though. Let's have a look at the boot screen. Oh yeah, can't even really see the jail bars in there anymore. Sweet. And of course, the Easy Flash 3 menu. You can still spot some jail bars there. Nice. Probably wouldn't even need to do the Luma bypass on this machine, but I'm going to do it anyway. See if we can completely get rid of the jail bars on this thing, but they're definitely very reduced, especially if you compare that to an original RF modulator, which unfortunately I'd already taken out of this machine, but I do have some screenshots buried somewhere, so we can do a little comparison between both. We'll start off with the composite this time. All right, there we go. That's how composite is now looking. Let's throw in the Easy Flash, something different. I'd say that's looking pretty good. And of course, the Des Test. Also looking pretty good. Let's check out S-Video. There's the Easy Flash 3, or maybe there's the tiniest hint of jail bars, but considering it's a Commodore 128, I'd say that's pretty good. And of course, the big test. Yeah, there we go. Hint of jail bars, but well, you can't win them all. Got to work with what we've got. So that looks pretty awesome, and I think on that note, we are done with all the RF replacements, or at least the install of all of them. Like I said, I also have the 128 DCR, which is this version, but I've already installed one in my DCR. And as you've seen with this machine, after you do this a few times, probably 4 or 5, or maybe the 10 that I've probably actually done this, you will start to lift pads. So I don't want to do that to the DCR, and yeah, I'll put up some pictures of that as well, but it looks pretty much the same as the 128D, so you're not really missing all that much. On that note, I think that is it. So yeah, these are all available on the Tindy store, and yeah, they are somewhat cheaper than the version 2 RF modulator, these things, and they're also a hell of a lot prettier. So I think that is it for this one. A huge thanks to the people that support the channel on Patreon and also support me, you know, making new stuff like this. So I really do appreciate that. And of course, they get ad-free early access to all videos. They also get discounts on the Tindy store, so these are a little bit cheaper for patrons. And yeah, thank you all for watching. Thank you for subscribing, liking, sticking with me and this channel, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye. I've got to say, it's been a long journey, but well worth it in the end. I couldn't be happier.